So welcome everyone to our Road Salt Roundtable. Just a few things before we get started. There is a chat feature. You can put any questions along the way or comments, or if you're having any technical difficulties yourself, to just post a note in the chat. There is the Q&A feature as well. You can use that as well. We're going to try to hold most of the questions until our discussion period, which is kind of the second half of this meeting. But if questions pop up that seem to be best addressed right away, then we can certainly manage those as we go. My name is Mara Tippett. I'm a watershed scientist with Raritan Headwaters Association, and we also have Director of Science, Christy McDonald, on the call today. She's going to be also helping to manage the chat and questions and the meeting going through today. So this is the first discussion and what we hope to be an ongoing biannual meeting that will include the sharing of ideas and opportunities, innovations and challenges of dealing with snow and ice in a way that balances safety and budgets and environmental health. So the Road Salt Roundtable will be a series of meetings with presentations from practitioners and discussion among municipalities and how they're attempting to strike this balance. Real quick, a little bit about Raritan Headwaters. We are a nonprofit, member-supported watershed association, and we are working to protect water resources in the upper Raritan River region. We've been doing this since 1959 and securing clean water for present and future generations. We protect land and water in our watershed and beyond through science, education, and advocacy. This series of workshops, the Watershed Tools for Local Leaders seminar series, the purpose of these meetings is to share and apply key science, planning, and regulatory tools to partner on projects to identify, protect, and restore water resources. And also I'll add to that, it's for us as a watershed organization to learn from you and from our partners how we can help to further your goals in your municipality with regard to water and land resources. The archive of past workshops and also a schedule of upcoming workshops is posted on our website. So you're free to go and explore some of the recorded sessions that we have up there now. And we did used to, just going back, we did used to hold a lot of these in person. Of course, for the last couple of years, they've been largely online. So we've been managing Zoom for what seems like forever now, but hopefully one day we'll get back to meeting in person and hopefully soon. So a little bit more about our watershed, particularly for those who are joining us from out of state. The North and South Branch Raritan River region is roughly 470 square miles and is roughly 43% of the entire Raritan River basin. The Raritan River is actually the only river system that's contained entirely within the state of New Jersey and all of its tributaries. And this spans 3 counties, Hunterdon, Somerset, and Morris counties, and includes all or part of 38 municipalities. There are a lot of people living here. There are many miles of streams, over 1,400 miles of river and stream, which provide drinking water to more than 1.5 million citizens here and living downstream. We are part of the Highlands water supply, and in this map to the right here, that's the shaded gray region up here, if you can see my cursor. So the South Branch of the Raritan River starts way up here in Bud Lake and travels south. It picks up the whole Neshannock River system, and then at the confluence in Branchburg, which I think my cursor kind of goes over, it meets the North Branch of the Raritan River, which starts up in Mendham. The main stem of the Raritan River then travels pretty much due east out to the Raritan Bay. Our watershed contains two of New Jersey's largest reservoirs, the Spruce Run Reservoir and Round Valley. You can see the outline of our watershed here, this dark black line here, and then the two reservoirs here, Spruce Run and Round Valley. So what are we here for today? Well, what brings us together today is simply put that our streams and our lakes and our reservoirs are getting saltier. So excess salts can impact soil, vegetation, groundwater, surface water, and air, posing a serious threat to not just our freshwater streams and lakes, fish, and other aquatic life, but to our drinking water supply and infrastructure as well. Chloride does not break down or settle out of water, so prevention is really the only solution. And the salt we continue to spread will have impacts far into the future. Although scientists have known about the potential for chloride to cause problems in the environment since at least the 1960s, it wasn't until recently that researchers began to learn the true extent of the problem. Chloride pollution affects our lives in multiple ways, from impacts to drinking water quality, and both directly, as we know, salt contaminates our surface and groundwater supply, and indirectly due to the corrosivity of salts and the increased potential for lead contamination. We all know about Flint, Michigan. Researchers have linked lead contamination there to high chloride levels in Flint's water, which had corroded lead pipes throughout the city's plumbing system. It's happening here too. Brick Township Municipal Utilities Authority also found road salting was leading to corrosive water that leaches lead from pipes in some homes. And so a lot of research on that is also being done right here in New Jersey. As I mentioned, high amounts of chloride are toxic to fish and aquatic organisms and amphibians. Chloride in streams, lakes, and wetlands harms aquatic vegetation and can change the plant community structure. It can also kill plants and trees along the roadside. Salt-laden soil loses its ability to retain water and store nutrients and is more prone to erosion and sediment runoff. So there's a big impact on our farmers as well. Chloride corrodes road surfaces and bridges and damages reinforcing rods, increasing maintenance and repair costs. Anyone who's ever left a bike at the beach knows how corrosive salt can be. Damage from salt corrosion alone may cost the US as much as $5 billion a year. There's no silver bullet when it comes to keeping our roads safe for winter travel while protecting the environment. But as the damaging effects of road salt on the environment become clear, new strategies and initiatives and innovations are required to protect our water resources. Road salt is this perfect example of a wicked problem. You may have heard this term, wicked problem, before. So a wicked problem is a problem that's difficult or impossible to solve for as many as 4 reasons. It could be incomplete or contradictory knowledge, the number of people and opinions involved, the large economic burden, and the interconnected nature of these problems with other problems. And I think road salt really fits the bill when we think about that, because we can't compromise safety on our roadways, and reducing our reliance on road salt has been challenging, to say the least, for this reason. And actually, in all honesty, I was reluctant to plan this workshop at first because I've heard so many discussions on why road salts are harming our ecosystems and our wildlife and our infrastructure and our drinking water. But we don't put a lot of emphasis and we don't have a lot of discussion around how we can actually start to tackle this problem, again, without compromising safety. What I do know from just researching this topic and looking around to see what other towns and counties and states are doing, we do know that the significant reductions in salt pollution, they're not going to happen overnight, but by taking the first small steps, we can make a huge difference in our communities, and maybe, just maybe, it will become your new passion. And some of the inspiration I found in putting this meeting together came from discovering the Lake George Association and Tim Fialo, who's a DPW road supervisor up in Hague, New York, who's featured in a documentary that I'll share the link to after this meeting that I found quite inspiring. It became his passion. You know, he's reluctant at first, but you can really tell that he's just started to enjoy tackling this problem and becomes a personal challenge for him. So I'm hoping that the stories that you hear today will shine a ray of hope on this wicked problem. And I know I found inspiration in them. And as for our role, our Raritan Headwaters role, I'm hoping that we can serve as a conduit to some of the resources that are out there, and that these meetings will serve as a forum to bring partners together and facilitate further discussion and action. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and let the experts take it from here. We really have a terrific lineup of speakers today that I'm very excited that are going to be sharing all of their knowledge with us. I'm going to be introducing each one a little bit in more detail before they start their presentation. And then again, after we go through the presentations, we will open it up to discussion at the end, so that we can hear more from you. You know, what are your concerns? What are your questions? What are the challenges that you faced? You know, what are some of the resources that perhaps we can help you to find? And so with that, I would like to welcome our first speaker and good friend, Deborah Kratzer. Debbie is an environmental specialist in the Division of Water Monitoring Standards and Pesticide Control in the Bureau of Environmental Analysis, Restoration, and Standards. I'm not really sure how you fit all of that on a business card, Debbie, but and in her role at DEP, she analyzes surface water quality data to produce the biennial integrated water quality assessment, writes the rules for surface and groundwater quality standards, oversees projects to restore water quality, including developing watershed plans and overseeing 319H grants, and performs outreach through programs such as the AmeriCorps Watershed Ambassadors. In addition to her work at DEP, she is president of Kratzer Environmental Services, where she specializes in environmental and natural resource inventories, biological inventories, and vernal pool studies. For her outstanding ERIs that have served as models in the field, Debbie has been awarded the Hunterdon County Outstanding Planning Award. Debbie also serves as the chair of the Kingwood Township Environmental Commission. Debbie has studied impacts of fluorides on water quality extensively, and through the partnership of the DEP's Community Water Monitoring Program and the New Jersey Watershed Watch Network, is managing a citizen science program to collect road salt data from freshwater streams throughout New Jersey. We think it's always important to set the stage for discussion by sharing the best available science, and we warmly welcome Debbie to share with us today. So Debbie, if you just want to tell me, next slide, I'll be happy to manage that for you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction. Apologies that the video won't work, but the important part is seeing the slides. So next slide. Since salt dissolves in water, we might expect precipitation to wash away all the salt used for winter de-icing, but unfortunately it doesn't. One study showed that up to 77% of the salt applied was retained in surface water, groundwater, or soils. And this means that salt levels might never return to background levels before the next winter salting begins. Next. Road salt is a major cause of freshwater salinization and can trigger negative effects on all trophic levels. For example, reductions in zooplankton result in more phytoplankton that they would normally eat. Increased salinization causes reduced growth in rainbow trout. It causes reductions in the growth and reproduction of other aquatic species and reduced biodiversity, which in turn leads to communities dominated by salt-tolerant species such as mosquitoes. Next. In lakes, salt alters nutrient cycles, which could mean higher export of greenhouse gases from wetlands and higher export of nitrogen and carbon from streams. Salt leads to increasing lake stratification, which creates anoxic zones at the bottom of lakes and increases the release of phosphorus from sediments, contributing to excessive macrophyte and algal growth. Next. Increased salt in drinking water can be unhealthy for people on salt-restricted diets, and high corrosivity, if it's not neutralized, can leach lead from pipes into drinking water. High chloride also makes the water taste bad. And finally, road salt mobilizes metal in soils, flushing, mobilizes metals in soils, flushing them into water bodies, and a moderate increase in salt in fresh water actually enhances the survival rates of E. coli. Next. So it's easy to just say, well, let's use alternatives, but alternative de-icers, we should be cautious about that idea because they also have impacts on water quality. Not only are they more expensive than sodium chloride, but some are more corrosive or even more toxic. Sand, for example, can be used to reduce the slipperiness of roads, but it washes into streams and clogs storm drains and clogs permeable paving, and it can smother aquatic life. Cinders are from coal, so it contains toxins. Anything organic like beet juice, calcium magnesium acetate, and urea contribute sugars or nitrogen, which can cause low dissolved oxygen and contribute to eutrophication and algal blooms. Environmentally friendly or pet-friendly claims on de-icer packaging is not regulated and has no official meaning. So especially because package labels are not required to list the chemical composition of their products. Next. Many studies have examined long-term trends in New Jersey's water quality. When we're evaluating the impacts of road salt, the parameters we're looking at are mainly chloride and total dissolved solids. Sodium and specific conductants are also observed to increase due to road salt, but there aren't any surface water quality standards for those parameters. The study illustrated on this slide examined water quality trends between 1976 and 1986 and found significant increasing trends at 49 stations for chloride, 39 stations for sodium, and 22 stations for specific conductants, while only a few stations had showed decreasing trends for those parameters. And the map on this slide shows the chloride trends with the blue dots proportional in size to the magnitude of the trend. Next. In this study, that was done in 2016, it looked at 4 decades of water quality data between 1971 and 2011. And all 4 studies showed upward trends for both chloride and specific conductants, and 3 of the 4 also showed increasing trends for TDS, and only 1 site showed no trend for TDS. Next. As I previously mentioned, not all salt runs into the streams. Some infiltrates into the groundwater. One study has shown that 40% of applied road salt enters a shallow aquifer. New Jersey DEP Environmental Trends Report summarized results from the Ambient Groundwater Quality Monitoring Network from 1999 to 2013. And they found that in southern New Jersey, 16% of the wells sampled exceeded the chloride standard, and in northern New Jersey, 20% exceeded the chloride standard. They also found that TDS and major ions were higher in wells located in urban versus undeveloped land use. Studies done elsewhere, such as in New York, showed that wells sampled closer to roads had higher chloride concentrations. Next. New Jersey DEP is required by the Federal Clean Water Act to conduct a biennial assessment of the overall health of New Jersey's water resources, so the appropriate steps can be taken to restore, maintain, and protect our water and the designated uses for the water. As you can see from this GIF, there have been more and more assessment units where surface water quality standards are exceeded for TDS and chloride over the years, from 2002 to our most recent report in 2020. In the 2020 report, 39 assessment units or subwatersheds exceeded TDS standards for aquatic life, and 8 assessment units exceeded the chronic chloride standard for aquatic life. And these exceedances mostly occurred in winter months. Next. So in this slide, we took a closer look at chloride and TDS by downloading the water quality data collected between 1997 and 2018 from the water quality portal. This was about 110,000 data points. The graphs on the slide show statewide data for the percent of samples exceeding the TDS and chloride standards each year. There were no samples exceeding standards in 1997 and 1998, but we observe an increasing trend in the percent of samples exceeding standards over the years. Next. We use the same data to look at it a little different way, and these graphs display the statewide exceedances by month. So this shows that the great majority of exceedances are occurring in the winter months. Next. So now I want to talk about specific conductance. Specific conductance is very easy and inexpensive to accurately measure in the field. And also, there are continuous data loggers that can provide a more complete picture of impacts due to road salt when we can't be out there sampling 24 hours a day. So in this slide, I'm showing where we collected the same data that we used on the previous couple of slides, but the data that was paired, so specific conductance and TDS data that was collected at the same time, and TDS and chloride data that was collected at the same time, and compared those to each other. So you can see that, but for both of these parameters, there's a very strong relationship. So we can be confident that we could use specific conductance as a surrogate, as a way to estimate the TDS and chloride. Because TDS and chloride, you have to measure and collect a sample and measure in the lab. So specific conductance is a nice substitute. Next. So the Bureau of Freshwater and Biological Monitoring here at DEP has been deploying continuous conductivity meters at various locations throughout the state since 2011, either for one winter or for an entire year. And we've observed from the data that the more urban watersheds had higher means and higher ranges. So they've gone up to like a much higher specific conductance level, up to 33,600 microsiemens per centimeter, which probably doesn't mean a whole lot to most people, but it is just about seawater, the saltiest seawater. Next. So here's an example. This slide displays specific conductance data, which is the red line, for one winter for an undeveloped watershed. The blue bars are inches of snow and the purple line is precipitation. You can see that the specific conductance doesn't change, not even after rain or snow events. And this is what we would expect because there's no development in that watershed and there's no salted roads upstream of the site. Next. So this slide compares data from the undeveloped watershed on the previous slide, contrasted with a nearby developed watershed for the same 5-day period. During this time period, the two sites experienced the same 2 snow events, and the same scale is used on both, so you can compare them. So on the top graph, the specific conductivity in Dunfield Creek is constant and close to 0. And in contrast, Rockaway Creek shows a dramatic increase in specific conductance following snow events. And the peak was nearly as salty as seawater. Next. So in this slide, in the next two slides, I'll demonstrate how we can use that correlation equation that I showed a few slides back to estimate the TDS exceedances from continuous specific conductance data collected for an entire year. And this example is in Canoe Brook. In this graph, the red is specific conductance again, and the purple bars are inches of snow. So you can see in the middle there, that's the winter. Next. So in this chart, there are blue boxes in like the years 2010, 2011, 2012. And those are samples that were collected and analyzed in a lab for total dissolved solids. And you can see one of those samples was pretty high and a couple of them are right around the red line. And the red line is the surface water quality standard for TDS, which is 500 milligrams per liter. But then when you go over to the right of the graph, all those little blue circles are the estimated TDS based on that conductivity data and using an equation. And you can see that there's quite a bit of exceedances over that red line. Click, please. And one more. There we go. Thank you. In this one, we're zooming in on that area of the estimated data. And it might be a little hard to see on this slide because unfortunately it's in the same color, but there's three blue boxes, and those are those individual grab samples that were measured in a lab. And two of them are above that, the red line above the standard. But you can see that the estimated values are above the standard for almost the entire winter. Next. So in step 3, we counted up the hours of the estimated exceedances shown in the previous graph. For the month of February, the TDS standard was exceeded 100% of the time, and the only month with 0 exceedances was July. Click, please. And at this site, the exceedances climbed again in October and November, which could be due to residual salt being concentrated during low flow, or possibly another source of specific conductance like a discharge, fertilizers, or water softeners. Click, please. And the second graph shows that there are a couple of other examples doing the same thing. And these two sites on that graph are less impacted than Canoe Brook, but they still show that the standard is being exceeded quite a bit in the winter. Next. So to summarize the water quality data analysis, we've identified increasing trends and impairments in TDS and chloride in our surface waters. We've identified that the highest values and exceedances are occurring in the winter after the application of road salt. We've used existing data to define the relationship between specific conductance and TDS and chloride. And we use that relationship to understand water quality variability and identify frequency and duration of exceedances of standards. Next. So just real quick, I was asked to also talk about the stormwater regulations concerning road salt. So this is a summary. All municipalities, public complexes, and highway agencies through the stormwater rules are required to use dry cleaning methods prior to washing their vehicles and equipment. So like sweeping and shoveling before hosing their equipment down. Tier A municipalities and public complexes are also required to have a permanent structure for storage of de-icers, good housekeeping measures, a monthly street sweeping, and annual employee training and reporting. In addition, highway agencies have to do the above list of things, but they also have to clean up piles of excess salt that result from after spreading and any spills within 72 hours after the end of a storm. Next. And we have one other regulation or rule related to snow, and that's called the snow removal and disposal policy. That's for when there's very heavy snow and it needs to be like removed and dumped somewhere. So that's for public agencies and entities, and it has guidelines for site selection, management of snow melt, and emergency authorization. Next. And as Mara mentioned in the beginning, we have a volunteer monitoring project that aims to create a snapshot of road salt levels in New Jersey's freshwater streams. Over 1,000 data points have been submitted by 117 volunteers for this winter. And they can be viewed, the results can be viewed on the map at NewJerseyWatershedWatch.org/road-salt, which is displayed on the screen. And we hope that this project involves people in thinking about this issue and having stewardship and encouraging them to reduce the overuse of salt while, of course, maintaining safety. We should also be having a report to summarize the data as well. Next. So just real quick, I want to go over our next steps. We have a restoration grant that was awarded to Brick Township Municipal Utilities Authority. They will be having a road salt workshop for the municipalities that they serve related to BMPs concerning road salt. They'll be putting together a report, and one town will be having a pilot project of implementation. We're also working on a white paper and a report called a total maximum daily load, which addresses the impairments that I showed on the previous slide that showed the map of the state. And that will be followed by a stakeholder process and an implementation plan. And of course, we'll always continue data collection and analysis. Next. And these are the references. So Mara can share the, or you can contact me for the slides, so in case you want to look at the references. And last slide is my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Oh my gosh, so a wealth of information, and we're looking forward to seeing what the volunteers are collecting after all of the snow we've had recently, and also looking to get volunteers active in this in the program as well, in municipalities and in our watershed. So lots more to discuss, and looking forward to seeing where this all goes. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Questions for Debbie, if you'd like to put them in the chat. Again, we'll be addressing the questions towards the end of the presentations today. Thank you so much. So next up is Richard Balgowan. Richard is the president of RM Balgowan Forensic and Engineering Services, LLC, where he provides technical services to attorneys, insurance companies, public authorities, road and street owners, trucking and railroad companies, and contractors for highway engineering, municipal engineering, civil engineering, construction engineering, design, traffic safety, work zone safety, and roadway maintenance and operations. From 2004 to 2011, Richard served as the Hamilton Township Director of Public Works, where he managed construction, operations and maintenance, permitting, facilities operations and maintenance, detention basins, dams, wastewater treatment, solid waste management, parks, playgrounds, and parking lot design and maintenance within the township. This included 625 miles of roads, 58 bridges and culverts, 62 buildings and facilities, and 49 parks, and all the winter maintenance activities required to ensure public safety. Prior to serving in Hamilton, Richard worked for the New Jersey Department of Transportation for 25 years, where most recently he was the regional maintenance engineer in the Division of Construction and Maintenance. At DOT, he managed the operations and maintenance of the state highway system in the DOT South region. And this included 7 counties containing approximately 4,000 lane miles of roads and bridges. I think it's safe to say that this man knows roads. Richard is here today to share just a small part of his extensive knowledge on snow and ice control and his experience as DPW director in Hamilton. Richard, thank you so much for agreeing to take part in our discussion today.
All right, so in addition, thanks for the great introduction. In addition to those qualifications, just as an FYI, I've been a member of the Winter Maintenance Committee under the Transportation Research Board, which is a branch of the National Academy of Sciences. It's an international entity. There's people on the committee from Norway and Japan and things like that. So that, in addition, I've also on the Winter Maintenance Committee, the American Public Works Association, in addition to other committees. So I've been doing this pretty much my entire career. I've been involved in snow and ice control. So, and I was very, very interested in this endeavor when you asked me to participate, because it's always been a very challenging thing for me and a pet peeve of mine when I see so much salt being used on our roadways unnecessarily. And I think we can all see, if you ride down the road after a snowstorm, even a couple of days after the snowstorm, the roads are often white with salt. And if you look at the shoulders, you can see a lot of snow granules on the shoulder. And that is a symptom of over applying salt. So a good example, and I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if it's just a fear of failure. But if you take a glass and you fill it half with salt, and then you fill the other half with water, and then you stirred it to try to dissolve the salt, how long do you think it would take you to get all that salt dissolved? It would never happen. It would take you forever, because there's a saturation point, and once the liquid is saturated, no more salt is going to go into solution unless there's additional liquid added. So it's the same thing when you apply salt to roadways. If you apply salt to roadways, only a certain amount of that salt is going to go into solution, and over a period of time, and the rest is likely going to be displaced, and it's going to end up in the shoulders, in our drainage system, in the roadside, those types of things. So that's why it's important to put the right amount of chemical down based on the event that you're receiving, and how long this event is going to be occurring, snowfall intensity, etc. This has been studied to death. There are best practices out there, published best practices on how to properly apply anti and de-icing chemicals to the roadway. And when I talk about anti-icing, so the whole purpose of salting a roadway is to prevent the snow and ice from bonding to the pavement. You want to keep snow and ice from bonding to the pavement so it can easily be pushed off. In some cases, it could be broomed off if we're talking sidewalks and things like that, or just put the plow down and push it off. Once the bond occurs, and then it becomes a de-icing application, and now you're going to use to actually get de-ice a pavement to burn through any snowpack, etc. It's going to take at least 4 times more salt than if you were able to maintain an anti-icing thing. So there are, back in the 90s, under the Strategic Highway Research Program, which was being overseen by the Federal Highway Administration, a study was done and a manual was developed. It's called the Manual of Practice for an Effective Anti-Icing Program. And that is broken down into different, there are 8 different storm types, everything leading from sleet to a light snow to moderate to heavy snow, etc., freezing rain. So there's 8 different storm types. And then it gives you the recommended application rates for different temperature ranges depending on that storm type. And I've used that manual for years and always been very, 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 very effective, and it's always worked. And if you follow those guidelines, you can apply the right amount of chemical at the right times and prevent the whole over application of salt. One of the critical components of that best practices manual is the use of pavement temperatures. So there are many, many times where you'll see it snowing and the roadway will be there won't have any snow on it. It will be black if it's an asphalt roadway. And that is happening because the pavement temperature is hot, is not below freezing, at or below freezing. The snow will melt. And I've had experienced many storms where that has happened. That's continued for the entire storm event, and there was absolutely no need to apply salt anywhere because the pavement temperatures were above freezing. And I've seen many agencies, regardless, still go out there and apply salt unnecessarily. So being able to know what the pavement temperatures are when you're applying chemicals is very, very important. There's a couple ways you can do that. One way is to have a pavement temperature forecast provided. So if you have a weather service vendor that's providing forecast information to you, they can include a pavement temperature forecast in that in their forecast. And most of those entities have access to pavement sensor data. For example, New Jersey has at least 30 unmanned automated weather stations scattered around the state. And this is not including airports. This is just on the highway systems that are monitoring pavement temperature, pavement condition. Is it wet pavement, dry pavement, wind speed, wind direction, precipitation type and intensity. Often these things are referred to as part of an RWIS, or Road Weather Information System. And with that, if you're able to use that, you can also have access to, if one of your roads has a system like that on there, you can actually, those sensors actually measure conductivity and inductance. So it will tell you the salinity of the salt solution that would be on the roadway. And then it would direct you that or advise you when you should go back out there and reapply chemicals because the solution is becoming too diluted. And when the pavement temperature reaches a certain point, it's going to refreeze. So there's systems out there that you can use. Like I said, DOT has like 30 of them. And then there's also poor man's things that you can do to measure those types of things, using things like digital refractometers to measure the salinity of any brine solution that might be on the roadway, those types of things. So there are many, many ways to reduce the application, the over application of salt on a roadway. Much of it involves just educating the workers, educating the supervisors and managers in the individual government agencies or even contractors. Chemical spreading equipment calibration, just the equipment alone. You need to know if you're putting 300 pounds per lane mile, if that's what your plan is, you need to know that that's what you're putting down. If you don't calibrate your equipment at least twice a year during the season, you could be putting down 800. You can be putting down less, but most of the time I found is that you're often putting down far more chemical that is needed. Another thing, and one of the things I did when I was director of public works in Hamilton Township, we set up a snow and ice management system, which was part of our asset management system that we had. And we were able to, every truck in the town, every snow fighting piece of equipment had a pavement temperature sensor in it. It had sensors that would let us know how much salt that truck was putting down per lane mile, how much liquid the truck would have been putting down, if it was pre-wetting the salt with calcium chloride, or if it was applying a liquid salt as a pre-treatment to the roadways. And we had that set up so it was as part of a geographic information system, and it included automated vehicle location. And we could actually watch our trucks on a screen in our operations center, working, plowing, spreading, and know how much salt they were actually putting down. So it was a way for us to monitor the application rates too. And if something went out of whack, we knew the truck and were able to bring it in and do any tweaks and modifications that were necessary to do that. So I could go on for a long time here, but I'm not, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but another component of that system, that GIS, AVL, winter snow and ice control management system that we had used, also included what was called a maintenance decision support system. And this was also based on that best practices manual I mentioned earlier, the manual practice for an effective anti-icing program. And what would happen, depending on the weather conditions that you were getting, that were being reported into the system, and what was actually happening, including your forecast information, it would actually advise you, here is what you should do following these best practices guidelines. And a lot of agencies around the country are using these. It's called MDSS, Maintenance Decision Support System, to kind of cookbook things. And I know snow and ice control is certainly not something that is cookbook, but it's certainly something that provides guidance to you and lets you know that here's what's going on and here's something you should consider doing. Right down to the, how much salt should be applied, those types of things. So there's a lot of things out there. A lot of technology out there, a lot of systems out there that can be used to manage the amount of salt that we're putting down on our roadways and monitor the amount of salt we're putting down our roadways and know that we're doing things, we're managing things to the best of our ability and not over applying salt. One joke that I used to say, I've done presentations for the University of Wisconsin at least twice a year since the 90s. And I've also done the same things for Rutgers. And one of the jokes I always put out there was that I'd say that I've considered sending machine sweepers out on some of the interstate highways in New Jersey after a storm, and saying that if I had the sweepers sweep the shoulders, I could get enough salt to last the entire winter for Hamilton Township. That's how much salt is over applied and is being completely wasted and damaging our environment. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, like I said, I could go on for a long time, but I really think a big thing here is the education of anyone who's involved in snow and ice control. Should be properly trained and educated. There are certificate programs available through the American Public Works Association, both for operators of vehicles involved in snow and ice control, as well as supervision. They are outstanding. I helped develop them, and I'm a certified snow and ice control supervisor myself. But that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Richard. I mean, it just seems like there are just so many tools out there, and it does come down to being aware that they're there. And also, we spoke a little bit offline about shared services. A lot of our municipalities where we are, we're smaller. We may not have the resources of Hamilton Township or some of the other big municipalities.
Right.
So,
and that's a great point. That's a great point, because things like this, when I talked about geographic information system, automated vehicle location system, tracking all the trucks and things like that, there's no reason why a number of these smaller municipalities can get together, or counties can get together and have a shared services agreement and have a vendor come in and set up a system that they all use, and you share the cost. Hamilton's a big town. We're 40 square miles, 90-some thousand population. So we are big and have a lot of taxpayers, but for the smaller municipalities, et cetera, there's no reason why they couldn't get together and put together a shared services agreement.
Yeah.
So the other things too, and I go back to some of the things Deborah was talking about, is there's pluses and minuses to everything. So there's things that you can do to further reduce application rates to your for salting. But they do still have some negative effects. She talked a little bit about agricultural byproducts, beet juice. There's corn products out there that if used, can result in a lower application rate. Most of them, or those agricultural byproducts, are natural anti-corrosion, natural corrosion inhibitors. And they allow salt to stay on the roadway longer, especially if you're putting it down as a brine. So they can reduce the amount of salt, but they also have negative impacts like talk about BOD and those types of things. So the whole key, I really think, is education. People have to know what the alternatives are and make the right decisions for themselves.
Absolutely. So I'm sure that there will be some questions for you later on, and hopefully you can stick around to the end and we can talk about some of these tools a little bit more. So thank you once again for joining us today and for sharing that. As I said, it sounds like you certainly know roads, and you've seen it all when it comes to managing the snow and ice. So our next speaker is Chris Nowitzki. Chris has served as the Lake George waterkeeper for the last 20 years, where he develops and implements programs that use an engineering and science-based approaches to protect the natural resources of the lake and its surrounding watershed. In 2005, he was named Conservationist of the Year by the Adirondack Council, and in 2019 was awarded the Lynn H. Enslow Memorial Award from New York Water Environment Association, a statewide organization of leaders in water quality management, for his work using the study of algae near the shore of the lake to identify and prioritize potential sources of pollutants. And it sounds like we may invite you to another roundtable in the future to talk about algal blooms, but that's another day. And I'm sure this is just two of many of the accolades Chris has received over the years. Prior to serving as the Lake George waterkeeper, Chris worked as a consulting engineer, and his extensive knowledge in several areas of municipal engineering, including stormwater management, erosion control, and wastewater design. He's a graduate of the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry at Syracuse, and a licensed engineer in New York and Pennsylvania. We've invited Chris to speak with us today because he was instrumental in the initiation and success of the Lake George Road Salt Reduction Initiative, a groundbreaking science to solutions protection program that has resulted in significant reductions in applied road salt in his watershed. So I'd like to welcome Chris. It's a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. I know you're quite busy in your own neck of the woods, so we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you very much, Myra. I always love talking about our work and having that opportunity. And I want to thank the two speakers, Debbie and Richard, ahead of me, because I think, they always say repetition is good. I'm definitely going to touch on some of what they spoke on and touched on well as talk about, how we really started that road salt initiative. And Lake George Waterkeeper, which is a program of the Lake George Association, which is actually the oldest lake association in the country, started back in 1885. So there we go. Sorry about that. So those of you who may not be familiar with Lake George, Lake George is located in the Adirondack Park. It is the largest lake in the Adirondack Park, 32 miles long. Very pristine waters, known for the early battles of the Revolution, In the 1800s, had the famous cultural schools, landscape painting. Right now, it's a huge tourist destination. We have 175 islands through the lake. Many of them have camping on it, large boating, big resorts. That's the Sagamore Resort on Green Island and Bolton Landing. So big investment in water quality to protect the lake. That's what our organization has done. We've been monitoring the lake for the past 40 years with the Darren Freshwater Institute, which is a research output for Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And we've also formed what is called the Jefferson Project, which is a partnership with IBM, RPI, and the LGA to make Lake George what we call the smartest lake in the world. So our work always starts with science. So since the 1980s, chloride levels have tripled in the lake. We are quite low, well below what toxic levels are of about 230 milligrams per liter, but we're on that slow trend that you don't like to see. As I said, again, tripled in the past 40 years. Road salt's an impact. We do a lot of outreach. This is actually an editorial by Times Union down in Albany, documenting the salt impacts to the lake. In fact, there's 15,000 tons of road salt applied by just the public entities around the lake, which is equal to about 3,000 railroad cars, or a train about 3 miles long getting dumped into the lake. But it's not, it's where you really see the impacts, and Debbie touched on this, are in our streams, where the chloride levels can actually be 150 times higher in the streams. And, counterintuitive what you may think, sometimes the highest chloride levels, although this shows a winter storm event, are actually, we do monitoring of numerous streams around the watershed with the loggers that Debbie had talked about. Your highest levels almost are in late summer, where your stream levels are at the lowest, and they can reflect and indicate those chloride levels that have actually seeped into our groundwater. So really, that's where we are seeing the big impacts are in groundwater and drinking wells. This was a study we partnered with the Adirondack Watershed Institute. Yellow, we didn't monitor, we actually took samples of 358 private wells. Yellow are where there's no road influence, no runoff from roads that may impact the wells. Black are from local roads handled by local municipalities, and the red are the state road impacts. And salt is a big issue in the Adirondacks. The governor's recently set up a road salt task force, of which our next speaker, Phill Sexton, is on, and I have been selected as well. And road salt, really, they tie it back to the 1980 Winter Olympics. Road salt wasn't a big issue. Once the Olympics were here, they needed to get the traffic through the mountain roads, have them drive up to Lake Placid. So they started using road salt. And what we found in this study, sodium, here you can see, again, yellow being the no runoff influence to the wells from roads, the black being the local roads, and the red being the state roads. You can see how sodium, 2 times higher, local roads, 9 times higher. With the state roads over to chloride, you can see 14 times higher and 150 times higher in state roads. So clearly, road salt is having an impact on the drinking water wells of people in the Adirondacks. Debbie touched on this again. I said repetition, you're going to get it. But this is so critical to that balance in our ecosystem. Zooplankton and phytoplankton, these are studies with the Jefferson Project, where you can see that as salt concentrations increase, the zooplankton, which find a balance with the phytoplankton, decrease, leaving more phytoplankton, leading to algae blooms, and that's how we get our algae blooms. I was referencing the impacts to trout hatchlings. This is again studied by the Jefferson Project, showing the impacts of the size on trout hatchlings, really reduction by about 15% of the trout hatchling sizes. So again, this has all prompted us to move to what we call a model of protection, model for protection, where we really take partnership, innovation, and investment and move towards applying what we call the science to solutions model. Mara had talked about the smaller municipalities and how it's difficult, you know, with the tighter budgets, smaller populations. That's where we are at up here in the Adirondacks, especially around Lake George. Towns annual population are maybe 2,000. The town I live in, the town of Hague, is 800. So really, how are these, and we've talked about the importance of understanding the science and how, you know, we need to correct those trends that we're seeing, but how are these smaller municipalities going to do it? So that's when we developed this model that really we all need to work together. And, you know, that's what my highlight will be. So this partnership, we developed the Save Lake George partnership, and you know, our addressing road salt actually started with aquatic invasive species, because we got together with our municipal partners around the lake. We have 9 municipalities, 3 counties, 1 village, not a large watershed, but you know, there still are a number of entities. And we started this partnership to stop aquatic invasives entering Lake George. So the municipalities realized how important the water quality is of Lake George to our $2 billion tourist economy and to protect property values. So we worked towards implementing the first mandatory inspection program of aquatic invasives coming and boats coming into Lake George. And while we were at the table, we said, why don't we work with our partners to address the next major issue, which was road salt. So we developed a memorandum of understanding, the same kind of roadmap that we used on aquatic invasive species, and put together what, you know, science-based approach. So we knew what the science was. We've been monitoring the lake for 30, 40 years, and we know what the impacts are. So why don't we work with the municipalities, let them know what the science is, say, we will work with you. We will actually work on bringing in better equipment, bringing in experts, like our next speaker that's going to come up, Phill Sexton. We'll work to get grants, and we'll work with you hand in hand. We'll hold an annual salt summit, and we'll provide training, but we need your commitment to address this serious issue. And we actually had a basin-wide commitment for every municipality around the watershed signed this MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. Again, then Richard had talked about the best practices. We held a couple salt summits. We hold them annually. We talked and got agreement on what the best practices were and got the municipalities to agree on that. They didn't really want to hop right on. You know, they were afraid of the environmentalists coming in, telling us what to do. They're not going to, you know, dictate how we do our job. We know how to do it. But then as we started working with them, started getting some better equipment, started hosting our annual salt summits where we have people from around the state, you know, nationally bring in these experts. We are not the experts. I am not the expert, but we know people that are. So let's make it easier. We got sponsorships by the various equipment providers. We held demos. We put this on for free. We don't charge anyone to come to this. So it's a full day conference and they can hear experts. We give them a little bit of science so they understand that, not too much, but then we let them hear. And now we've gotten to a point where we can actually have the operators talking to the operators. And that's where we know that we've really reached a success, and we can stand back and let them talk their own language. And the big thing was that we now brought in a database standard operation and procedures where, as Richard talked to some of the things, the data trackers, the AVLs, so that you know now how much salt that particular vehicles are adding on particular routes, and actually use that to kind of compare route to route. So they've got very similar weather conditions. They are achieving the same bare road conditions, same level of service, but one is using twice as much salt as the other. So why is that? Start asking those questions. And again, that's where we bring in our experts to work with the drivers, understand the implementation of practices, and how do we move towards the implementation of those practices. So this is where we brought in the innovation. We had the trackers put in the trucks. Richard talked about some of the temperature sensors, the better weather forecasting. We have IBM, who actually has developed a hypersensitive forecasting within the Lake George watershed. So they actually develop forecasts within 330 meters. So really small grids, so that you can actually see, and this is a very mountainous region. So where the hills are much deeper and intense than the valleys. So how is that weather affecting what you put on? And then the last part was investment. This is where we really separate. Our organization really puts our money where our mouth is. Science and technology, we paid for the trackers to be put in all the trucks. And at one point, we had nearly all municipal trucks within the watershed tracking salt applications. As superintendents have changed and trucks have changed, those haven't always gotten upgraded. But at one point, we were able to track nearly every truck in the watershed and know how much salt was being put in. And again, if you want to reduce, you need to know what you're putting down. You need to measure before you do that. The techniques and equipment, we're talking about, what operator doesn't want to have better equipment? We actually worked with, through our SALT summits and our partnership with WIT Advisors, a partnership with Metal Plus, who brought in the live edge plow. So instead of having a straight metal blade across the bottom, 11 feet long, this had series of segmented metal blades, which would conform to the road better. And through the data tracking, we were actually able to document how drivers with the live edge plow used 25 to 40% more salt when you took that plow away and gave them the other standard plow technology. So with the equipment and how that gets better, the use of roadside cameras, so you can actually take photos of the roads and see what the conditions are and see, number one, do you need to go out right away, or can we wait an hour? When you apply brine, what are the conditions of the road? So set these up at key locations and use that technology. And then the education and training, that really echoes again what Richard said, bringing in our experts. Here we have Rakib Omir with VASIS and WIT Advisors, providing training and calibration training to the village of Lake George. So really, how can they understand and learn how to implement these practices, learn how the data is, visit it after a post-storm with the advisors, and try to learn from their practices. And again, I heard Richard mention the white on the roads after. So really, even our drivers are now to a point where they'll patrol the roads after a storm event, take notes on where they actually see where that residual salt is, and that may actually save them time from going out early in the next storm, depending on what the size of the storm event is, because that residual salt on the road may actually turn into the brine and be enough to really pre-treat those roads when the event comes. So really, it's working with the towns, bringing in that technology, partnering with them, bringing in that innovation, and then really backing up with our own investment. We were able to get some state monies. Obviously, road salt contamination became a big issue, and we were able to invest and show the state that we were making progress on that. And one quick, so how do we know we're making the progress? Well, there's proof in the numbers. This is, and Mara referenced Tim Fiallo from the town of Hague, who, back in 2016-17, they did not want to work with us at all. They did not want to hear about it. You environmentalists don't talk to us, but then we started working with them, brought in these experts who worked with them, trained them. And then it also took a lot of donuts, by the way. We met with them a lot, brought a lot of donuts. But then they started understanding it. And now the town of Hague, these are the annual numbers for the town of Hague. And you can see how they have reduced their numbers significantly. And we are talking, so with a small town, 800 population, when you start saving $45,000, 50% of their annual salt budget, that becomes big in a town. And what is even better is that we are seeing benefits through our monitoring. So this is Hague Brook, the largest brook in the town of Hague. And our monitoring of Hague Brook has now showed, these are base flow conditions, so not storm events, that there is now, we are seeing an annual 4% reduction in chloride levels in our streams. So it takes a while for the groundwater and whatnot to fill out so that your applications on the road, as it makes it down into the groundwater and then seeps into the streams, it takes a while. There's a big reservoir of groundwater. We actually developed a reduction model with a colleague of mine, Dr. Jim Sutherland, that said in Lake George watershed, if we reduced road salt by 50%, it would take 25 years for those chloride levels to drop back to 50% levels of what they are currently. So here you can see these numbers are kind of falling in line with that. So with that, I did have a slide of questions, but we'll hold those to the end. I always like to work a picture of my daughter in here. So that's her with a snowman. So I just want to thank you. And I want to thank all the local municipalities that have joined in and listened to this, and glad you're here, and look forward to talking to you more. Thanks, Mara.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. I mean, just to see, how successful it has been, and to know that you've been able to get, your entire watershed on board with this, and all of the municipalities around Lake George have done something to start to address this. It's a great story, and as I said, it's really an inspiration for us to start to form some partnerships and try to get these technologies into the hands of our local DPWs here. So again, thank you so much, and thanks for sticking around for some questions at the end. I'm sure there'll be a number of them. So with that, I would like to welcome our next speaker, Phill Sexton. Phill Sexton is the founder and managing director of WIT Companies, WIT Advisors, and the WIT Collaborative. WIT Advisors administers Sustainable Winter Management Program, or the SWIM program, and is the industry advisor to the Snow and Ice Management Association. Phill is one of the nation's preeminent green and snow industry mentors, educators, and sustainability advisors, with over 30 years of experience successfully developing, growing, and managing businesses in the green, snow, and facilities management industries. Before he founded WIT Advisors, Phill helped lead one of the largest snow removal companies in the country and went to Harvard to study salt. Phill and his team at WIT served as the consultants on the Lake George Road Salt Reduction Initiative, as Chris just spoke about, and has become the go-to person for reducing salt pollution in communities all around the US, I have learned. He has graciously agreed to join us this afternoon, from Long Island, so far from his home and far from here. With some of the towns he works with achieving close to 70% reductions in road salt, I can see why his time is in high demand. So welcome, Phill. I'm so glad to have you here today, and I'm glad you could jump out of your other meeting and join us.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thanks for breaking me out of jail here for a little while. Chris may be wondering why I'm in Long Island, so I'll call you later, Chris. Chris, I live sort of closer to where Chris is. I'm typically in upstate New York, sort of near Albany, and we actually have a client down here in Long Island we started working with, and so I had to get permission to break out of this meeting, but it's a worthwhile break. So thanks for having me. I'll sort of add to the I'm having the same problem Chris had here a minute ago with the slideshow. Let me just go from the beginning again here. So where we fit in really was in Chris's slide with the model for protection we're really honored to be one of their partners of the LGA. And where we come into play really is at a practical level. So just to give you a little bit of high level of who we are, we're advisors to primarily our niche business is the large scale landscape and snow management industries. We do govern the Sustainable Winter Management Program. As Mara said, we are industry advisors to Simon. I actually used to work with the Snow and Ice Management Association at a staff level capacity, helping them develop a lot of the training for the industry. I started with Simon years ago, and we've taken it on. We've continued it at Wood Advisors, an initiative called the Sustainable Salt Initiative, which is primarily where we started to really measure how salt's being used, particularly by the private side of the industry, where there's really almost no measuring taking place now. As Richard's sort of alluded, I think you'll see it more at a state and regional municipal level. There's probably some decent measuring going on, but not much going on the private side of the industry. And one of the last things we do is we actually have a cooperative of landscape companies throughout the country, branded as the WIT Collaborative. So, and I think one thing just to stress, this is my bald head here, just in case you're curious what I look like, but one of the important contexts I like to share is with all the things that I do, really at the end of the day, though, the core of my career experience really has been at the operations level. And so actually you saw another name on my beginning slide, Ed, who I'm actually here with today. We actually started in the field back I started in the late 80s, early 90s. And so got a lot of experience both at the practical application level all the way up to, the executive level, ownership level of why salt's being applied the way it is. And one of my last roles on the operations side of the industry was I was a former partner, and you'll see in this resume, if you will, I actually oversaw the largest private snow and ice management operation in the country, which, I've joked with a lot of people over the years, a little bit of what I do now is sort of my penance for now knowing that at one time I likely was overseeing where we were the largest offenders of all this snow or salt application going on. And so I take that very seriously, in that both at the time, I don't think anyone in the industry knew that this salt thing was even a problem. And then when you're applying it at such a large scale, you do tend to learn a lot of what the drivers and variables are, why it does. So we developed this Sustainable Winter Management Program, which is really, that's what the system, if you will, or that's the set of guidelines that's being deployed in Lake George that Chris spoke about. We also sort of branded as a business to business solution. So although we work with a lot of large watershed initiatives, we also work with private properties. And that's where this program, it's actually why it was originally developed, was because for as much salt as being applied on the roads, can you imagine on sort of Route 1, wherever you want to go in the country where it's densely populated, or I-95, if you thought about it in terms of a lane mile of road is semi-equivalent to an acre of parking lot. So imagine how many acres or how many lane miles of parking lot are on either side of a lane mile of roadway. So there's quite a bit more salt that's potentially originating from those parking lot settings. And so that's really what my Harvard experience that Mara talked about really quickly was. So that's what I studied more so, was what's going on, not only at the road level, but also at the private property level, and analyzing, what all the drivers and variables are that's causing salt to be applied the way that it is. So that's really the foundation of knowledge and the genesis of what a lot today knows as SWIM, or Sustainable Winter Management. So SWIM's really been developed as a continuous improvement model through a system of guidelines that enables that. And so we incorporate a lot of some of what you heard Chris talk about as far as property specific data, or road specific data. We look at salt outputs, we look at level of service being achieved. I thought Chris did a great job of describing the analogy of, we see this all the time. If you take a fleet of, let's say, 10 trucks, you'll see some that are applying half of what others are applying, yet achieving the same level of service, yet don't really realize that that's what's happening in their operations. So we, in sort of a third party, unbiased, neutral way, are able to provide that level of awareness and knowledge. And then we're really the ones that try to jump in and provide that continuous improvement training and intervention to get to those, some of those 70% numbers that you heard about. And I'll show you a little bit more of that at the end. So this is what SWIM looks like at a very broad level. That's what we're looking at. But to simplify it, it really boils down to these 6 primary standards of policy that enable standards of practice, which is measuring, calibration, prevention, and a lot of goes into each one of these categories. So that's sort of what I call the first phase of jumping into SWIM, to then be able to analyze, improve, and optimize your operations and your outputs. And so trying to simplify that a little bit more so is we think about that in terms of, performance-based contracts, or more so something we talk about on the private side or at the property level. But in all cases, we're using these site weather stations, GPS-enabled salt tracking, prevention of the bond through an anti-icing method process, optimization technology includes things like the segmented plow technology that Chris spoke about. And then we look at that through an automated monitoring process. So we're collecting a lot of data, a lot of pictures, a lot of GPS salt tracking data to then be able to measure how an operation is performing and where the anomalies and where the opportunities are to improve. And then we do certify organizations. We have used that certification model in Lake George, and that's really been the accountability model that we use. So something I like to always share with folks is this is a very mission-driven business that we have, though, whereas lots of property damage, lots of road damage, lots of environmental damage being caused by this salt. So we're looking to help folks protect property and protect water. And we have a pretty big goal that we calculating the conservatively, I'll say this, so talk about it more in like 30% reductions. But if we were able to replicate the results that we've been able to achieve almost anywhere where we've employed or deployed SWIM, we know that by 2025, if we were able to affect 50,000 acres and 5,000 lane miles of road, that's going to allow us to reduce salt by 5 billion pounds per year, which I'm not even sure this $250,000 number equates anymore, given I'm not even sure what salt's going to cost this year. But I have to imagine, just from what we've been hearing and just what we see in supply chain, that number is only going to go up. So I'd want to get everyone to think about this for a minute. A lot of the salt, particularly in your market where you are in your watershed, a lot of the salt, did you know, does not even come from the United States. And so I think this is something important to think about, because not only are we causing this, call it pollution level issue, but we're causing a lot of other issues because of where it originates from. And isn't it interesting that this pollution that we're causing into our waterways here at home is actually originating a lot of times from salt coming from overseas. So there's barges of salt that come into the eastern ports of the United States all the time. They're shipping it in now to get ready for next winter, believe it or not. So this barge here equates to about 50 to 55,000 tons of salt. And so if you think about 50 of these barges, we're trying to, that 5 billion pounds of salt, we're trying to help save on an annual basis through our efforts. That would equate to reducing about 50 of these barges from ever needing to enter the United States. So even though we have plenty of salt here in the US and plenty of it's mined, but I'm just here to tell you that in New Jersey and in Maryland and in a lot of the mid-Atlantic, a lot of that salt is not actually coming from the United States. So just think about that in terms of how we're continuing to contribute to our own problem here. So I think this has been said enough, so I'll blast through these slides. But if you think this is a localized issue, it's not. It's happening everywhere in the United States where salt's being applied. The legislation train has already left the station on how different states and municipalities may want to regulate this. Chris spoke a little bit about the New York Adirondack Salt Reduction Task Force, which I have been named to and started serving on, and that's what the headline is there. So that was formed almost 2 years ago, actually. Now is when they started talking about that. And we work on this problem in Virginia. We work on this problem all the way far west of St. Louis. So we're working on it in Ontario in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, where they have a similar drinking water issue. So it's happening everywhere. And just to share a little bit further context, the reason that I originally got excited about this, or at least it caught my attention, was back in the sort of mid 2000s. So this study was done in 2008, but a lot of the salt pollution that we were seeing was being attributed to roads. And so this pie chart here actually represents a study that was done in the state of New Hampshire, where the federal EPA actually stopped, it just got finished recently, but they stopped a road expansion of the I-93 corridor from South Boston all the way up into the Lakes districts of New Hampshire. And what the EPA did was they actually worked with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services to work with the New Hampshire Department of Transportation to say, hey, before we allow this road expansion to continue, you need to do something. You need to put a program in place to reduce the amount of chloride loading that we're seeing in adjacent water bodies. One of the reactions to that was a study that showed timeout. And if you look carefully here, the third box down, they were able to show somewhat substantially that they were actually only about 10% of the problem, where most of the chloride, the non-point source runoff of this chloride loading was actually originating from parking lots. And so that goes back to that statement I made earlier about, if you think about I-95 or Route 1 or wherever you can think of in a densely populated area, where is more of this salt being applied? And it only stands to reason that this 50% number makes sense. So when you start to look at where a lot of these initiatives, including what's going on at Lake George, it's really all around you right now. And so I think it's just a matter of time. And this may be, the beginning stage of why the New Jersey turns from gray to blue in this too. So it's happening everywhere. It's time to do something about it and name the address where you are. If there's road salt being applied in your community, there is something you can do about it. And so we're really proud again of what we've been doing in Lake George and lots of other places. So, we call it generally where we've been able to deploy swim, even in Lake George. We are seeing, after about 3 to 4 seasons, the ability to enable about 50% reduction. Chris did speak to, I think, our best proof case in Lake George to date, which is the small town of Hague, which, even though it's only 800 people population, but they actually apply salt on local roads, county roads, and state roads. So they have agreements for all 3 of those. So they're a big influencer when it comes to salt reduction. And I'll tell you, this group here, Chris mentioned that a lot about, needing a lot of donuts. At one point, we actually had to evolve from donuts to bourbon. So, but at one point we were feeling the same resistance that Chris spoke about. But once we can get through and start to show, using data that, hey, there's a benefit, there's something that you can gain from this, that's usually where we make some traction with this. We do work a lot on the private side. Many of you may be aware of a grocery store chain, Wegmans. We've been working with them for a number of years, and this is actually a slide they shared with me. So this is really where I got more excited about our results, because they were actually sort of able to see it in themselves and in stores where we've been piloting this for a number of years. And so they're equating this not only to saving money, but they're equating it now to the environmental impact that they've been able to positively enable. And then lastly, I'll just share, there's a third-party study that was done on this program as well by the Rochester Institute of Technology. They have a group there called the New York Pollution Prevention Institute, and they got interested in some of the results we were seeing. And so not only could they see this 50% reduction in the salting occurrences that were occurring, but they were also then able to normalize that to carbon footprint and energy use. And so why I like to share this slide is because I think a lot of times, depending on the categories of stakeholders that we're working with, the salt reduction may not necessarily always be interesting enough. And so is there another carrot we can dangle to say, well, if you think about that barge and preventing that barge from ever having to come here, and the carbon footprint that creates, and then if you think about the reduced number of trips that a truck going down a road, I think Richard, you may relate that to a lap or a cycle. So if we're able to reduce cycles by 50%, if we're able to reduce the life cycle of mining the salt, shipping the salt, delivering the salt, unloading the salt, loading the salt back up. I mean, there's a lot that goes into the life cycle that we can help save beyond just the material output. And so I'll leave it to that. There's tons more that I love to share with this, Mar, but I think I'll sort of leave it to questions at this point, if that works for you.
No, that's terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much. Extremely informative and eye-opening. It had not even occurred to me that a lot of our salt comes from overseas. I was thinking, I'd read a story recently about, I think it was 2019, where we were having supply issues because a lot of the salt was, stuck in Maine and we couldn't get it down here to New Jersey. But it hadn't even occurred to me that we may have supply issues because we're not able to get it from other countries. And so it's amazing just how this issue kind of radiates and touches so many other ones, like you mentioned, how it relates to global warming. And right now in New Jersey, municipalities are tasked with considering climate adaptation strategies and incorporating risk and vulnerability assessments into their master plans. So all of New Jersey municipalities have to do that. And so this is just one more thing that I think municipalities have to be aware of as they're approaching that. So yeah, thank you once again for joining us. I knew you'd be a wealth of knowledge, and I know you have so much more that you could share with us if only we had all the time in the world. And I do wish we had donuts and bourbon for everyone today. Perhaps at a future meeting, we'll plan for that. So I would like to open it up to any questions. If anyone does have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. Christy McDonald, our Director of Science, has volunteered to go through the questions, and I think we can unmute people as well if you'd like to ask.
Okay, yes, we can do that. And Chris and Richard, if you want, you can turn on your video. It is enabled now. So if anybody has questions, you can enter them into the chat. You can raise your hand if you want to ask the question.
And I would like to mention also that we will be posting this webinar to our website. I know I was frantically trying to take notes, and then I remembered that we were recording it, so I didn't have to do that. I can go back and reference it. So that will be available as well up on our site. And
don't be shy, everyone. Oh, looks like someone's putting a question. Rick Blood is asking, how does a municipality advise or manage salt usage on private parking lots? Who would like to answer that?
Well, that's a very good question. And I'm not sure if I can this is Rich Balgown, if I have the answer to that, but there are stormwater management regulations that apply directly to adjacent property owners to the highways. And that's something that obviously, if you're going to be contaminating the stormwater, that might be a mechanism to attempt to address that. I know there are some, there are things that ordinances that most municipalities have that do discuss adjacent property owners' responsibilities regarding snow and ice control. For example, most of those adjacent property owners are responsible for maintaining their sidewalks clear of snow and ice within a certain period after the storm ends. That might be a mechanism to attempt to address something there. There are things where people are prohibited from plowing their parking lots and then pushing the snow out onto the roadway, which we've seen some people do. But I don't think there's anything anywhere at the moment that I'm aware of that actually specifies or restricts the amount of chlorides that property owners are allowed to use on their parking lots, on their sidewalks, that types of things. So that's something I think, that's a great question. And that's something that I think municipalities need to take a look at and find ways to deal with.
This
I know,
is,
just real quick. I know in my current career as a forensic engineer, and like I said, I deal with the legal profession and things like that. I actually get cases where people slip and fall as a result of over applications of salt in parking lots and sidewalks. So you get that ball bearing effect. People get out of their cars, they start walking, they slip on the loose granular. So there's certainly a need for something to be done. I just don't know the exact answer to that question, but there are mechanisms there that could be used.
I just wanted to add to that story. I was just looking at my colleague Ed back in the 90s. I said, hey, remember that lawsuit at Metro Park is down in Rockville, Maryland? Like, remember that woman that slipped on all the salt? And that's right. Yeah. So there was a lawsuit over that.
Yep.
the one thing I would add, Chris Nowitzki, is Phill, actually, I think you had it up on your one publication, is there is a watershed up in Maine that actually was under a consent order for chlorides, that they actually had a TMDL and they had to implement a program, the Long Creek watershed, just outside of Portland. So they actually, that was one mechanism that actually was brought into, and they had a big mall and they had some big industry and corporation, kind of an industrial park there. So that may be one way, if you had chloride data and try to tie it to a consent order or some type of stream monitoring or levels.
Well, and actually, that story is just expanded also, Chris. They've actually just, I think it's actually now in play. The MS4 permit process now speaks to that. So they're going to actually have to, each municipality and property within that watershed is going to have to show some form of a chloride reduction plan, right? And so that's where, we like the idea of that, just because our formula that I just showed you there is sort of like handing it to them on a silver platter, I suppose. But so that's definitely happening. So, and I think that's sort of the point I was making with that map too, is this is those kind of regulations, if you will. I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg of that starting, right? So, because it's, how serious of an issue is this? And I think we're finding out pretty darn serious, and it's a fairly invisible epidemic, if you will, as far as chloride loading goes. So we're not putting any less salt down, to Richard's point earlier, just back in the 1980s when the Lake Placid Olympics happened, and that's when salt really started taking form in our state. But the level of service expectations over the years have changed. So I think even when you take liability out of the picture, which New Hampshire's even tried to do, it still doesn't necessarily change people's level of service expectations. So there's going to have to be something else that enables that. And I think, I think it's sort of the carrot and the stick, if you will. So we tend to try to be the carrot, try to be the incentive side of this. But there's likely going to have to be a requirement to say, like, you have to have a plan of how to reduce this. So there it is.
There
Seems
was,
like there's-
when everything we're talking about is going to be, it's very, very difficult. But one of the things that I always fall back on is, do you remember, I don't know how old you guys are, but do you remember the days when liquids weren't really available? So you would use, in cold temperatures, you use something called premix, which was solid sodium chloride. And usually it was solid calcium chloride flakes that were mixed in with that, and very dusty and all this other things. And eventually we got away from that, and solid materials such as sodium chloride would be, if you were applying solid materials to the road, you would pre-wet those materials with another product. And it could be calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, it could be straight salt brine if you chose to do so. And one of the benefits that was supposed to occur from that is, first of all, the liquid is there to jumpstart the salt and help the salt go into a liquid form quicker. But one of the other benefits is that the liquid was supposed to keep the solid material on the pavement longer. As a result of that, less salt could be used. I've just never seen that happen. We're pre-wetting our salt. Just about everybody's pre-wetting, but there's been, I don't see it anyway, there's been any real reduction in the amount of chemical used. So for somebody's putting down 300 pounds per lane mile, that's what they were doing. Now they're pre-wetting with calcium or magnesium or whatever they choose to do. I don't see them dropping the salt application down by 30% or whatever the number is, which you're supposed to realize here.
That's right. Because they're not measuring and analyzing that is one of the reasons. But yeah, it's more, we say that all the time. There's the tool, right? There's the right way to use the tool. And then there's you got to make sure that people understand this tool is meant to be used to then stop using this tool, right? So
exactly. Yep.
If you're going to get the pneumatic nailer out, you got to put the hammer away.
Yeah. So it still might come down to education or just fear of failure. I don't know.
I mean, Chris knows that we were seeing that in Lake George, where I think right now brine's the hot idea, right? Yep. We see that everywhere, where they're now applying brine on the roads, anti-icing pre-storm, pre-accumulation, but they've done nothing to actually dial down the solid salt in the truck that's being put down later. So there's a gap in information, if you will, at a cultural level to say, like, no, time out, guys, because we have this, now we need to change our practice over here. So the two aren't necessarily connecting. That's what we find. And that's part of what we try to help solve. Is it's one thing to have the tool and the best practice, is another to actually implement it and understand it.
Right. Yep. No, I agree with you 100%.
Okay, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of really interesting future opportunities to talk and to provide useful tools to municipalities to help them develop plans. I have a question here from Kathy Redling. She's asking or saying salting is largely driven by safety concerns. What messages are being provided to police departments, safety groups, OEM, as they often dictate salting?
I can probably answer that because I've got firsthand experience with that. So we would, especially when I was with Hamilton Township, but it also happened when I was with the DOT, and you get calls from the state police. So we would, when I started with Hamilton Township, one of the first things that I did was to implement an anti-icing policy using liquids, using liquid salt brine to apply to the pavements ahead of any frozen precipitation that might start. And we would use not just a straight salt brine, but we would use a blend of salt and a small percentage of calcium chloride, as well as an agricultural byproduct mixed in too. But no sooner would we put that down and we start getting a little bit of precipitation that we'd get calls from the police department saying that, oh, the road looks like it's going to start getting icy, or this and that. Can you send a truck out to put more salt down? And this would even not just the liquid stuff, but even with the solid chemicals. And it got to the point where myself, even at the director level, would actually physically go out to the site and ask the police officer to meet me out there and show me what he was talking about, because I knew what he was saying, unless somebody completely missed it completely, that he was wrong. And in almost every instance, he was wrong. And the primary, and again, this comes down to, I believe, to be education. So although we may get some of our supervisors and things like that educated on how salt is supposed to work, at both liquids and solids, often the police department, they're not educated in snow and ice control. All they know is what they see and what they believe, what they see and what they think is going on. So that's a really good question. And I think it comes down to education. I don't think the education should just be limited to just the public works workers or state forces. It should, because so much money is spent on snow and ice control. If I recall, it's the single most costly maintenance activity that states or agencies undertake. So really, education shouldn't just be with the workers and stuff in the public works arena. Those types of things should include things like police departments, the police officers, your councilmen, if you have a councilman or committeeman, the mayor. All those people should be involved. They should be educated in knowing look, here's how this works. And the reason they should know that is because not just because it's such a high public safety item, but because of the amount of money that is being spent on this.
Right.
So
Big
I don't know
ways.
if that answers.
I'll just add to it that a couple of things to think about. Actually, it sounded like you want to go first. Sorry, Mara.
Oh, no, I was recalling one of the Lake George Salt Summits. There was a discussion about the cameras that are on the trucks. And forgive me, Tim Fialo's, I think, deputy there, and I don't recall his name right now.
Matt, yeah.
He'd mentioned how he'd had residents kind of calling to complaining, like, hey, you salt the stretch of road, what's going on? And that the cameras actually provided a level of protection for the operators, because they could go back to the footage and play it and say, no, we were there. We salted this stretch of road. You're protected. It's fine. And perhaps that could even be extended to the police and OEMs to reassure them that road has been treated. So it's just another level of protection, I think, for the operator.
That's a great point. And even with when I talked about geographic information systems, automatic vehicle location systems, those create a breadcrumb trail. So not just the cameras, but you can go into your GIS and you can look, okay, somebody's complaining about a road, whether it be a police officer or a resident. You can go in there and say, we just had a truck out there at this time of day and they spread this amount of salt on your road. So your road was treated. So you have that breadcrumb trail. I remember an instance, and this is a little bit a tangent, where we had a road in Hamilton where 13 mailboxes were knocked down. Okay, now the only mailboxes can get knocked down, but generally they get knocked down because you got heavy wet snow, the plow trucks were going too fast. Well, the GIS gives you such detailed information that we were able to go in there and find out who was on that road, what trucks were there, who the drivers of those trucks were, and how fast those trucks were actually going when they plowed. So again, it's off on a tangent a little bit, but so much information. If agencies were to implement this GIS AVL snow and ice control management system, which is really not that expensive to do, especially if you were to do like a shared services agreement, all that information is there and could be helpful in answering those inquiries like that. You know, my road wasn't salted, or it's not, you know, that type of thing. So good point with the cameras, though. Excellent.
We have about 2 minutes left, and I just wanted to kind of try to get to the last couple of questions. There's a question for Richard. Do you think you or even Phill or Chris or Debbie could provide a short video that could be used for education and outreach to law enforcement and emergency management folks in the municipalities? That's a question that I guess we could follow up with you about later. You can tell us if you know of something. We have a question here from Ann Heasley from Sustainable Jersey. She's asking about something she heard recently about the impact of road salt on green infrastructure adjacent to roads and parking lots. What is the impact of road salt, and can they be designed to handle road salt? Any advice or resources?
I mentioned earlier, I guess via email, that I have a number of PowerPoint presentations that I've done over the years on one is specifically on minimizing the environmental impacts of road salt on the environment. And one section of that PowerPoint deals with damage to roadside vegetation. And I've got photos where you can see evergreen trees that have just browned out as a result of salt contamination, holes in steel beams on bridges caused by road salts that went through open bridge deck joints and went down and sat on the flanges and such of the bridge. So I'm willing to provide all of those presentations to anybody that wants them. I'll email them to Tamara, and she can distribute them as she sees fits. But I'm not sure if I have any actual video things out there. I'd have to look and see.
No, my one recommendation would be, green infrastructure primarily looks at infiltration to reduce stormwater. And, that's putting the stormwater into the ground. And once you put it in the ground, you're just increasing your chloride contamination. So
Right.
it's reduction, that you really want to look at.
Yes.
If you want to try to prevent that chloride impact.
Mara, do you want to wrap it up? And
Sure. Yes. No, thank you. Thank you so much again to all of our presenters. Again, I really appreciate all of your time and expertise. And thank you very much to the participants who've joined us today. We hope to see you at the next roundtable event. And we will be in touch between now and then with some resources, and we may send out a survey as well, just to try to gather some information from our municipal partners on what their current practices are and what their needs are. So thank you once again for joining us. And enjoy the rest of your day, and take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mara, for pulling this together, and thanks to all our speakers. This is wonderful.
Yep. Thank you.
Everyone,
Have a great day, everyone.
take care.